Available on your radio dial. Joining us now is Republican presidential candidate. He's better known as the Libertarian in the race, is Ron Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
First of all, I like your plan about $1 trillion in specific cuts that if you were president, that you'd make the first year in the White House.
Right.
And you'd say you'd create a balanced federal budget by the third year of your presidency. I think it's... For example, I've been working with your son Rand and Congressman Connie Mack on the Mack Penny plan, and that plan, I don't know if you'd support it or not. Maybe you obviously have your own plan, but
right.
The Mack Penny plan, if you're not familiar with it, would balance the budget in 8 years, and it would basically hold spending at current levels for 6 years, and then keep spending at 18% GDP for the last 2, and we'd be at a balanced budget. Now, your son Rand Paul supports it, and Connie Mack supports it, and I support it.
Right, and I think it's very decent. Compared to what we're doing now, it would be a real improvement. I come down the side of thinking this debt problem that the world is facing is just not a U.S. debt or a state debt or student debt. It's a world debt problem when you look at what's going on in Europe. So I think I see it as being much more severe than most others because other than the penny plan, I don't think anybody's talking about any serious cuts at all. Certainly the other candidates in this race on the Republican side are not talking about cuts. So I wanted to emphasize the severity of this problem that we face by actually offering real cuts. This, to me, makes the big difference. And so far in this last 24, 36 hours, I think the acceptance of this, especially from the conservative Republicans, have been very, very good. I think they've been waiting to hear a program where there would be some real cuts.
Well, look, you do very well. You have a very strong base. I often agree with you on economic matters, and as it relates to the size and the scope and the role and the influence of government. Some of your comments over the years about the Fed. Bernanke is a disaster, and as is Tim Geithner, and these guys ought to be fired immediately. They're a disgrace. So I think it's a good plan. Do you think it's doable? How would you get it done?
Well, winning the presidency means that you do get a consensus. Obviously, if the people are 100% opposed to you, you don't have a prayer of doing it. So if you get the endorsement by winning the presidency, you're going to have a lot of support also in the Congress. And besides, most people in Congress aren't philosophically motivated. They're motivated by trying to figure out what the people want and how do they please the people. So I would say that the ability, if you look at it, exactly what's in Washington right now, it would be very difficult. I mean, especially with split government. So if you have a very successful election, you have a new administration, you win the Senate, and you get people who are more emboldened in the House, yes, you can implement this. But you have to have support from the people. Unfortunately, for 30, 40, 50 years, the people have supported the notion that deficits aren't all that bad, and that comes from across the political spectrum. Don't worry too much about the deficits. We can borrow and we can inflate and we can do these things. So they've accepted this for a long time. So I think the transition is what we're noticing right now, especially with the Tea Party movement and other things going on, that people are recognizing that we just can't continue to do this. So we're in flux. Our movement, which, all the fiscal conservatives would be part of that, we've made great progress in these last 4 years. Not so much as all of a sudden they become the real true believers in the sense that they're philosophically absolutely with us, but they've come to the reality we just can't keep doing this. I mean, I think people know there's a financial crisis, and it's not because we have a balanced budget. It's because we have too much debt and it's unsustainable.
All right, I'm listening to you, and there's not a word you've just said that I disagree with. So I was reading, I guess, about a week ago, and I brought this up with Rand, who's on the program. He's on regularly, and he's on radio and TV with us often. I thought he had some great regulatory reform ideas, and I wanted to support him in that effort. And you were asked, albeit a leading question, but it said, do you think radio talk show people like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Mark Levin fear that you're making them obsolete because your views reveal them as the status that they are? And your answer was, I think that if I gain influence, it's an embarrassment to them because they're not really limited government people, yet they make their livelihood fooling people into thinking that they're real leaders of limited government. And when you look back to find out that in fact they have not been, look at the Bush budget, the Bush 8 years, the budget exploded. Do you really think that Rush, Sean, me, Fox News, that we're all big government statists, as you say?
Are those literal quotes, or are you just sort of paraphrasing?
I gave you an exact answer that you gave. That we make our living fooling people into thinking we're real leaders of limited government. Because if you weren't listening to this program during the Bush years, or if you were listening, then you would know that I was very, very upset with Republicans not balancing the budget, spending well beyond their means. And as bad as that got, especially in the last year of the Bush administration, we have now quadrupled that stupidity under Obama. And I was a big critic of big spending. I did not support Medicare prescription drugs, for example, under the Bush years. I did not support Harriet Miers. There were issues involving immigration I was against with President Bush. So I'm just, why would you make that remark?
Well, I would have to admit that maybe my views have been modified a little bit in these last couple of days because I've been very encouraged by some that I didn't think were as fiscally conservative as I am, have been supportive. So I'm very pleased that you, even on this very program, you spoke out favorably on what I'm trying to do. So there's no reason why I can't modify, my concerns because, for so long we haven't made any inroads. I think you've been more willing to look at the Federal Reserve, but the other names you mentioned were less willing to do that. But I think this is changing because I think now that we've exposed the Federal Reserve and how they bail out so many, see, if you look at, Sean, that is huge because the Federal Reserve can spend more money than the whole of Congress. So this is where I think I'm making, some progress, and for that reason, maybe the various people you mentioned and I are coming closer together. And I would say that's very good.
The only thing I want to tell you is, and this is important, I have always agreed with you on your comments about the economy. I've told you this. I've interviewed you many times. I've expressed my support for your desire for real limited government. And so this is not just something I have not changed. I have been consistent. I wrote a book called Conservative Victory. I didn't write Republican Victory. I'm not even a registered Republican. I'm a registered conservative in New York. So you and I have disagreements on foreign policy, and we could talk about those. But the fact that you said we're big government status, or that I am, is not reflected by my record, and even the times that I supported President Bush when they spent too much money, I was an outspoken critic.
Well, there's pretty good evidence, and people have written about this, that if you look at the last 10 years, $4 trillion of our net increase had to do with overseas expenditures. So I would say that we have to address that. If we don't, if all this money has to be spent overseas, that would not qualify as being conservative because it's way too much spending and we don't have any money, so we can't. We're borrowing $4 billion a day to keep all this going, but it's all not food stamps.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other things going on too.
Well, we had $4 trillion in new debt under President Bush, which, by the way, that was over an 8-year period of time, and under Obama we accomplished that goal, if you want to call it such a thing, in 2.5 years. Now, this is where, for example, you were against the killing of bin Laden and this other al-Qaeda leader recently, and tell us why.
Well, I wasn't against it. Matter of fact, voted to authorize it. I was unhappy with the procedure. I was unhappy with the fact that the authority that I voted for, we sent people into Afghanistan. We had them trapped at Tora Bora. Then we just sort of backed off and decided to fight a new war. So that didn't make any sense. And then we waited 10 years, and did it in a different fashion. And I don't know your position on this, but I think maybe you were favorable toward it. I wanted to solve all that mess with a letter of marque and reprisal, getting explicit approval from the Congress, limit the war, don't declare war on countries that did not attack us, but only were, loosely associated with it. These governments haven't attacked us. So the letter of marque and reprisal, if that principle had been used, probably bin Laden would have been done in about a year at the most, or maybe within a few weeks. I think they would have gotten him at Tora Bora, quite frankly.
All right, but since we killed him when we did and where we did, and the other Al-Qaeda leader, you have expressed thoughts like you thought it was illegal.
Well, I said it did not follow, the proper procedures when you go into a foreign country. We have a policy with Pakistan that's schizophrenic. We both bomb them and aggravate the people. At the same time, we give billions of dollars to their government. So we undermine that whole situation. So the people now are against their government because their government are seen as being our puppets. So that makes that thing impossible. So, and several of those very bad guys, we've gotten them out of Pakistan with the help of the government. So I don't know why we shouldn't have considered that rather than doing it the way we did it. I think it's going to lead to, it is leading to, this whole thing is breaking down in Pakistan, and we're driving Pakistan as well as the Iranians right into the Chinese camp, and that is not going to be good for us, nor for Israel.
There's been horrific duplicity on the part of Pakistan and some other countries, and you're right. We give them aid. They're duplicitous. They're backstabbing. They play both sides of the fence. Saudi Arabia is another example of that, in my opinion. And they play all sides of the fence. They encourage terrorism on the one hand. They live under strict Sharia law and oppress women's rights. And yet we have to beg them for, oil because we're too stupid to drill for the oil that we have in our own country.
Yeah. And Sean, Saudi Arabia, I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but 15 of those guys on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia, and there was none in Iraq. But this is why they get pretty upset with us, because of that, because we prop up these dictators, and Saudi Arabia, of course, has Sharia law. And what has happened to the Christians in Iraq and in Afghanistan? They have virtually been routed, first time in hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, for the very first time. So these kind of consequences we shouldn't ignore.
Well, foreign policy is not a perfect science either, and alliances are imperfect. We align with the former Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. And so there are times that you've got to do business with bad people in the process of getting worse people. I just don't think, it sounds to me that if you had your way, that you would not be as engaged in foreign policy, that we kind of isolate ourselves. And by the way, a lot of people support this. A lot of friends of mine support it. We'd shut ourselves off a little bit. And I think if we were to do that, remember, we were attacked. The first Trade Center bombing, 9/11, Khobar Towers, U.S. embassies, Kenya, Tanzania, the USS Cole, and the 9/11 Commission said we have a group of people at war with us, and we were never at war with them. It gets complicated when they start coming to your own homeland and they want to kill you.
Yeah, but the 9/11 Commissions, the DOD and the CIA, also recognize that a very important motivation was the huge military base that we had in Saudi Arabia, and that's why we removed it right after 9/11, as well as the constant bombing and the many people who died in Iraq during the 1990s. And that's been recognized by our own DOD department and the CIA. And 9/11 Commission said the same thing. So it wasn't like they just popped out of the thin air and started doing this. They have been very explicit on their explanation of what motivated them.
All right. Well, Congressman, I'm glad we straightened it out, and I accept your apology, by the way, for not listening to this program 3 hours a day. And I just wanted to make clear to you where I stand on issues. I'm a registered conservative, by the way.
Okay, so we can be friends?
No, I've never disliked you. I think you have been a voice in the wilderness for many years about limited government, and I think, and a return to constitutional principles. I disagree with you on foreign policy, but But on economic policy, I don't really find many areas of disagreement.
Well, I was just kidding you a little bit.
All right. Well, I've been very nice to you and your son Rand every time you've been on, and I will be. And by the way, you're welcome to come on this program as often as you want.
I appreciate that.
All right.
All right.
All right. And to come on the TV program, don't be a stranger.
Okay, we'll always consider that.
Always consider that. Oh, great. I'll watch you. You want to waste your time on these other networks? Nobody's going to see you. Come on my show, and people will actually see you.
That sounds good.
All right, Dr. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
800-941